Good evening, folks. This is The Weird Part, and I am your host, Vincent Treewell. Tonight, we have a very special guest who is Ashley Hilt. She's been on the show before. Um, she is a podcaster, a paranormal researcher, an active investigator and cryptozoologist, and probably the single most knowledgeable person on the subject of Indrid Cold, period. Please join me in welcoming returning guest and friend of the show, Ashley Hilt.
Well, thank you for having me. That's quite a compliment. I gotta say, I really appreciate the fact that I am the go-to for all the injured cold.
It's a limited field, I'll be honest. There's a lot of people who know a little bit, but from the content that that I've seen from you, I don't have a second place on that one. Um, there's not a lot of, I mean, maybe Hellier, I guess, but you really seem to have done the work and gone deep on Indrid Cold. Um, let's see. For those who have only heard that name, Indrid Cold, from the '02 The Mothman Prophecies movie, starring Richard Gere and Laura Linney, could you give us a very entry-level introduction to
Um,
Mr. Cold?
yeah. Um, there one night, a just regular guy from Mineral Wells, West Virginia, was driving home from work. His name's Woodrow Derenberger. While Woodrow was driving home from work, he noticed that he was kind of being tailgated a little bit by a vehicle behind him until said vehicle actually popped up into the air and off the road and was actually hovering over him. Eventually, this vehicle lands in front of him. It does come to a complete stop, which of course stops Woodrow's car as well. And he saw that this was not a car that had been trailing him the whole time. It was an oddly shaped type of flying craft. I think we call them UFOs here. And and it was weird. Talking about the craft for a second, it was pretty unusual. It's the way that Woodrow described it was like a kerosene, like a lantern on its side. Another way I like to describe it for people is like a piece of wrapped candy, right? It had the thick middle and then the thinner sides. So the craft comes to a stop and the door opens up and out pops a man, a human-looking man. He was just looked like everybody else. Woodrow didn't really go too in depth about his physical appearance. His daughter Tanya later does, and said that he was kind of darker skinned. Olive skin seems to be the popular remark here, but kind of Oriental type of eyes. But nonetheless, still a regular human guy who approaches Woodrow's vehicle and starts speaking with him telepathically. He asked Woodrow to roll down the car window, and he does. And Indrid is just kind of nice. Of course, Woodrow's afraid of what's going on, but he's not concerned for his life, just concerned about the overall situation. They kind of get to talking. They didn't have a very long meeting. It was maybe about 10 minutes. Indrid and oh, I'm sorry. We didn't know his name was Indrid at the time, but for lack of a better word, Indrid had started asking Woodrow some questions, general questions. Like he pointed at the city skyline, from far off and asked what it was. Woodrow said it was a city, and he said, "Oh, well, we've got those too. They're called gatherings." He just kind of mentioned his curiosity and how, he was just kind of here to get some answers to some very basic things that he was very much like us, but was curious. And so eventually, after, shooting the breeze for a moment, Indrid sends Woody on his way. He says, "Hey, I'll be back. I want you to tell people about me. I want you to go tell people that this happened. I want you to tell them that we met, and I'll be back to prove that we met." And so he does. So, they both go their separate ways. Woodrow goes home and, he gets home and he's very jarred by something, right? His wife notices that he's very upset, but not just that, he was eager to kind of tell her what just happened. And so, he does. He sits her down and explains to her the situation. At that point, they call the local police. He tells them what happened. He had a press conference immediately the next day, a media conference, where he told everybody what happened, and he would continue to tell the story, and Indrid would keep good on his word and would show back up again in Woodrow's life, and this just kind of kickstarted a lifelong friendship that the two had. And yeah, that's the short version of it.
And it takes a lot of twists and turns because, well, for one thing, John Keel starts investigating this pretty much around the time that it had happened.
Yeah.
And he includes it in the Mothman Prophecies, though Indrid Cold himself isn't nearly as big a character in the book as he becomes in the movie. Would that sound about right?
Yeah, absolutely. The family was actually, I mean, just to kind of, if anybody's here and their knowledge on Indrid Cold starts and stops at the movie, um, the Derenberger family was very upset about the portrayal of Indrid, and of course of the character that's supposed to be Woodrow. Because it kind of made him look crazy, and that
He's
wasn't
played by the guy who was pulling a shotgun on everybody.
probably, I think so. I haven't seen it in a
Yes,
while.
and he's kind of, yeah, he's not really what Woodrow Durenberger was like
No.
at all. He was a salesman
Yeah.
and correct, and he was very like he didn't have a trouble talking to people. He was,
Yeah. He's
you
pretty
know,
pretty charismatic, but kind of um very simple. I mean, and I don't mean that in the way of like an insult. He was just a very easy type of person, just very easygoing.
salt of the
Easy.
earth, you might say.
Yeah, very salt of the earth.
And he has some adventures, you might call them, some incidents where he goes places,
Yeah.
but he couldn't really have. I don't know where he went or where he didn't go. But sometimes I think his family went with him to like go see NASA headquarters or something. And the people they're talking to are not the people in charge of NASA. And he seems to go somewhere and something happens, but it's hard to say what. Does
Yeah,
that
he was definitely a very, I mean, the media on this, he ended up becoming very popular. And so he was, I mean, they were definitely taking the family and traveling around to different places, so he could give lectures and things like that at different conferences. There weren't podcasts back then. So you actually, if you wanted to appear on something, you had to get up and go. And that's kind of what they were doing. Yeah, I mean, for quite a while.
and he writes a book, Visitors from Lanulos. And what can you tell us about that?
So Woodrow actually wasn't the one to write the book. It was dictated to somebody else, but not ghost wrote it. I mean, we know who the guy is, but somebody wrote it for him.
Kind of an
Um,
as told to type of thing.
yeah, and yeah, so I mean, it's Woodrow's story. It's just he's no author. Again, salt of the earth.
Mhm.
That's okay. It
Yes, yes.
happens. He did put the book out, but I believe he didn't put his book out until I mean, I think it was like I might be getting Mothman Prophecies confused, but I mean, it was well over 10 years later. It was a long time. Took him a while to do that. Now he kind of had, I believe he might have written a book first, actually written the book and then would take copies around with him when he would go places. But I mean, it was pretty limited. Usually it was just he was giving them to other researchers, things like that. And then eventually sat down with the gentleman who did eventually write the book, and then put it all together. It's not very long, to be honest with you. It's pretty simple. It's pretty short. There's not that much information to it. I mean, you can sit down and read it in a night easily.
And it's a very strange story. Um, I mean, Lanulos is kind of a paradise, if I'm correct. At least some people's paradise. And
Yeah, it's
it's
utopian. Yeah,
mhm. And I guess I just and I'm just asking your opinion for what it's
sure.
worth. Do you think he had like abduction type of experiences where he did go somewhere, or he thought that he went somewhere, or what do you think happened there?
He was definitely going somewhere. And that's we know that he was because he was disappearing for weeks and sometimes even months on end.
Wow.
His wife, who ended up divorcing him eventually. I mean, that was one of the big reasons for the divorce was because he would just take off. I mean, he would just be gone and would come back and she'd be like, "Where were you?" And he'd be like, "Well, I was on Lanulos." And
Where
she
everybody's naked, by the way, just for what it's worth, right?
right.
Yes.
Because it's the Garden of Eden, right? That's what you do.
Yes. Yes.
Um, but yeah, I mean, and she was just like, okay, I'm not dealing with that, and ends up taking off. She actually met and fell in love and remarried another a ufologist, who she had met because they would go stay at their house all the time whenever they were that in the area for Indrid stuff.
I
But
would never have guessed that. Okay, I
yeah,
have not I heard that before. I would have assumed once she was done with him, she was tapping out of this whole other world's ufology
she hated it.
completely.
Yeah. No, no, I mean, she went and married that guy and they ended up, staying married. His name was Bob something. I can't remember. He's from the Cleveland area. I know that. Um, but I think that she probably, I mean, obviously had an opportunity to fall in love with somebody else, so she did, which is fine. It's whatever.
Oh yes, I
But
mean people end up not together for a lot of reasons that don't involve Lanulos, you
yeah,
know?
I mean, it was one of the reasons. There were more reasons, but and some of them do are centered on the fact that like they had people stalking their house all the time, and the media was constantly there, and people, I mean, they couldn't keep a phone number to save their life because people would eventually find it and harass them, and she just didn't want any part of that anymore. Meanwhile, the new husband, Bob, he didn't have an alien friend. He just studied them, so it was boring.
Took the
Um,
professional distance, yes,
Yeah, yeah.
yes.
So, Woodrow would leave. And according to him, when he was leaving, taking these trips, Indrid would take him to his planet, which Indrid said was called Lanulos. And they were, I mean, just very similar to us in a lot of ways. They were just like futuristic humans, but they had, of course, like you said, utopian one world government, one world religion, which ended up being Christianity, which is odd. Yes, everybody walked around naked, but they didn't have things like human ego and any concern for why you shouldn't walk around naked, I guess I should say. Um, but they were very much just similar to us and just what you would imagine any sci-fi movie would be us in 1,000 years. And,
You
you
make
know,
a good point there. Yes,
yeah,
that's kind of the projected future that if we could get it right, it'd be kind of like this.
right. I
Yes.
mean, just think of any stereotypical futuristic Earth. I mean, that's basically what he was describing here. And, you know, do I think that he was actually going to Lanulos? Is that, or do I think that he was potentially going somewhere else or not going anywhere at all? That's a good question. I do find it hard to believe some of the ideas, like Christianity, for example. And I'm not
The
knocking.
odds that that would be the
Yeah,
every other person in the world is wrong. That seems kind of hard to accept, especially when they're not even from Earth, you
yeah.
know?
Well, with a religion that only about 28% of the entire world's population believes in to begin with, it just would seem so odd that would be it. I mean, I have my own speculations. I think that Woodrow was introduced to these ideas and these people and these places and these things, but I do have reason to believe that he was being um, lied to.
No, there's nothing wrong. Yeah, he was being manipulated. Looking for a nicer word than manipulated, guided. You know,
Yeah.
um, that's one thing that yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I was
Hmm.
going to ask you if you saw any parallels between Lanulos and like Fairyland, where where the Fae go, where they take you.
I don't know. Honestly, that's not really my bag, so I don't know
Mhm.
too much about Fae, and what they do.
Well, they just take you to a place. I mean, this is all folklore. I don't have any, eyewitness accounts, but there's a lot of legend that the little people, who are not always little, who often look just like us, get you to come with them. And in their land, everything's perfect. And then when they dump you back, you find that, you're older, time's off, something's happened, and it just seemed similar. And that maybe they were projecting what would seem perfect to him. It's one possibility.
Sure. I mean, and I think again, I do think that is a very real possibility. Just I mean, why should we trust these things? That's where my skeptical brain goes to. Why should we trust anything that they say or they show us or we shouldn't.
You wouldn't
And
do that with regular flesh and blood human beings.
no, you
If
wouldn't.
some
You
dude just comes walking up to you and tells you, "Hey, I can take you to this wonderful place," he might be crazy, or he might be a bad person. There's a lot of ways that could go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, hey, it could all be true, I don't know.
It could
I
be.
haven't been there. But, for me, I have to kind of wave my caution flag and be like, my little yellow flag and be like, I don't know about this. But like I said, I've got my own reasons to kind of believe. And that's just tied into other research that I've done about, alien life or other abductees or things like that, high strangeness in general, that I feel like this follows the same kind of theme of all of that in a way.
Did he have the concern about nuclear war and even nuclear energy that a lot of the contactees had?
Not really. Not I mean, I'm sure that he's probably, I'm sure they've talked about it. But it wasn't like it wasn't like the main focus. Like he like Indra didn't come here to stop us from destroying ourselves. He seems to have came here out of pure curiosity. And even though there was some lore behind some of the stuff that they did or they were tasked to do, because at first, with the first introduction that Indrid had, he didn't, like I said, he didn't tell Widow's name. He just told him that he was a searcher. And, of course, Woody didn't know what that meant. And, again, they go into like their own politics and things like that. Um, which I don't know. I guess I don't really, I struggle to retain that kind of information personally just because it doesn't really affect us. I don't think it does,
It's
you
okay
know.
to say that it just bores you to tears.
I hate politics, as I hate our own politics, right? I don't want to talk about another planet's politics. But they did seem to have some type of deeper mission and that's how they knew about Earth, and that's why, Earth was here. But I think that Indrid was selfish and his reasons as to why he was here.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Like wasn't just the standard issue alien space brother that comes to tell you stop being dumbasses and don't have a nuclear war and be like us. He seemed like more of a free agent.
Well, and I think at the time that wasn't really a big concern anyway. Just looking at the climate of politics during the 1960s into the 70s. I mean, sure, you've always got some type of war or some type of, something going on with somebody somewhere. But I don't think that there was any real threat to blow each other up. I think even like nowadays, we don't really, I think we're smart enough to know better. I think we dropped a nuclear bomb and we went, wow, that really screwed everything up there. Maybe we shouldn't do that again. And I think that these things know that we're smarter than that.
No, there's nothing wrong with cautious optimism.
Yeah.
I generally feel the same way that I don't see it looming the way that it did maybe decades ago,
Yeah.
like right after World War II,
Yeah. We have
when they
much
were.
larger environmental concerns than nuclear war.
Yes, yes. It's there's so much irony we could swim in it, but yes, the things we didn't see turn out to be the most dangerous sometimes.
Right.
So how did his relationship with Indrid Cold affect Durenberger over the years? I mean, well, I knew the causes of breakup of his marriage. Like, he's not a person who profited from this much at all, did he?
I mean, he profited in dopamine deposits. Don't get me wrong. He felt very special, right?
Hmm.
And we're all human. We all just want to feel special. Um, but as far as like monetarily, no, not at all. He didn't profit from it. He couldn't keep a job. I mean, he really couldn't. Like I mentioned, like we said, he was a salesman, and one of the first jobs he did, he was a like a sewing machine salesman, and back then, you'd have to get on canvas, you'd have to go door to door and sell things. He had I mean, it's kind of a funny story now, but he had an incident where he was at a woman's house and she confronted him and she was like, they impregnated you, didn't they? And he was just like, yeah, they did. He just was, he's heard it all at this point. And it was just, there was always controversy. It was always hard for him to keep any employment because he had, well, crazy human people following him around, or because the people that were trying to hire him thought that he was crazy because he believed all these things. But to say he didn't make any money at all or anything, I mean, like I said, the family would take trips, and the trips were, I mean, the family didn't take vacations before this point. They didn't have the money to do that. And now, pre-divorce, they were able to go to different places and stuff. I mean, yeah, there was some profit there, but not on any large scale by any means. Depression definitely overtook him. He ended up becoming a raging alcoholic because of it, and lost his family, eventually loses his wife, loses the kids, soiled that relationship with the kids, even the family. I mean, to this day, throughout most of the family, he was, loony is the quote that I was given. So
Wow. Hmm.
it definitely soiled all of his personal relationships. But kind of once you open up Pandora's box, I mean, you can't put it back in, and that's why, because I always wonder, why didn't you just tell Indra to leave him alone? But how can you now? Your whole entire foundation has been rocked by a truth that's bigger than you. You're not going to, you can't. You don't really have a choice.
It's easy to say, yeah, what you'd do if you were there when you weren't there.
Right.
But the truth, that would be, well, you nailed it. Endorphin hits. I mean, really, this spaceman comes and tells me stuff when we go to another planet. I mean, that's hard to
Yeah.
say, I got stuff going on. I can't make it this week, man. That's
Right.
that's tough to reject,
Yeah. Yeah. But no, it definitely, I mean, it had a mental toll on him for sure. And, what was the solution there? Well, it's not like they teach that course when you're getting your master's in psychology, What are you supposed to do?
In fact, I wouldn't bring it up in that context.
Exactly. Exactly.
Just to shift a little bit, how did you meet Tanya Durenberger, who is unfortunately no longer with us? And what
Yeah,
can you tell us about her?
absolutely. So Tanya, of course, I started with my research in the Mothman, and you can't you can't research Mothman without hitting the Indrid Cold brick wall. And with Tanya being still alive, and Woodrow not, I was kind of familiar with her, because I had seen that she was kind of making claims about Indrid and what was going on, with him, and he had died recently or something, and it was kind of a big deal. But um, I decided to just reach out to her directly. I'm going to talk to the woman myself, and when I did, she informed me that Indrid was in fact not dead, that she had been mistaken. And, at that point, up until that point, most of the people I talk to, when I take an eyewitness account, usually it's just pretty cut and dry, right? They tell me their story, and maybe we'll talk for like a week and then we never talk again. But there's nothing much more to say about it, and I get it. With Tanya, if Indrid was alive and Indrid was still actively visiting her, like she told me he was, if I was going to meet this guy, if he was real and I was going to meet him, the only way I would do that would be by befriending Tanya. Because yes, I could have messaged her and said, "Well, if Indrid's real, let me meet him right now." But the thing is that what does she gain? from doing that? Well, what would she gain from doing that introduction? Nothing. She'd have nothing to gain. Meanwhile, I'd have everything to gain, and I'd have all the money, and I'd be super famous for having a super cool alien friend, right?
Yes, and
Um,
that's presuming that she could summon him at will,
right.
which I've never known anybody who even claimed to be able to
No,
do that with,
no.
you know,
Anything?
yes,
Yeah,
non-human intelligences, let's
yeah.
say.
Right. She'd have
They show
to.
up when they care to show up.
Right. She'd
When
be
you
like,
do
"Oh, this girl wants to
48
meet
things
you."
the right way.
Right. This girl that I don't know wants to meet you. You've got to come here and meet her. Why would he do that? So, okay, so let me be friends with Tanya. Let's see where this goes. And what started off as very selfish reasons for me to endure a friendship ended up turning into a genuine friendship. Me and Tanya talked very regularly about things that weren't about Indrid, and I definitely did want to get to know her. And it taught me a lot as an investigator about curating friendships with the witnesses. Because one of the things that I've looked into, and I think we've even kind of touched on it a bit on this show, is about trauma and how trauma might play into some of these instances of high strangeness. And, with Tanya, I could kind of really play with that and see, if there's anything there or, whatever. I could really get inside of this person's head and go from there. So we talk about all kinds of things. Tanya, was she the daughter of Woodrow Derenberger and had an uncle alien? Of course. But was she a person? Yes, absolutely. She was in a terrible, horrible, abusive marriage for about 15 years. She finally
Oh
left that
my.
marriage. Yeah, found the love of her life. They bred and trained Saint Bernards, but trained them to be service dogs, and then would help with different organizations donating service dogs to people that couldn't afford them. She ended up getting MS, really, really bad. That's what killed her eventually. But in the beginning stages of it, she would work for all kinds of MS charities. She would do marathons and dance-a-thons and I mean all kinds of events to raise money for MS. I mean, she, and of course she hung out with a lot of people that took a lot of advantage of her and just if I'm being quite honest, she took advantage of some people and it happens. We're human. She still had a very human experience like the rest of us.
Such is the way of the
um
world, yes. There's no,
right.
nobody's 100% good, 100% bad. I
Yeah.
absolutely don't believe that. Yeah.
Yeah, she had 4 kids of her own. And then grandkids on top of that. I mean, it's like I said, very human person, very normal.
That's fascinating though that just everything because Woodrow died like relatively young. Like
He was pretty young. Yeah, I think he
I'm
died in like the
thinking,
90s.
okay. I was thinking it was before you were even born, but
It might have been.
I, and maybe should have taken another more note or two, but it just sounds like a fascinating relationship to be able to talk with her as a firsthand witness. And she was 100% on the reality of Indrid Cold and his sons. Is that correct?
hmm Correct. Yeah. Well, yeah. And Indrid, she says, has 3 kids. Um, so he's got 2 sons and a daughter, and they all would hang out together. So that's kind of how when I get into this and I talk about Indrid, um, I can't really talk about it much through Woodrow's perspective. I never talked to him. I can talk about it more through Tanya's perspective than I can with anything. So while the Woodrow story is of course the kickoff and where it started, where my knowledge really starts is with Tanya growing up. So the night that he came home, Tanya was only like 4 years old at the time. She's very young, and she says that she kind of overheard the conversation about what was going on and what he had said. So she said typically he would come home from work and then they would all get some family time together. She said he was an amazing father. So that night they didn't get the family time together. They were rushed off to their rooms and her and her brother listened in on the conversation
I'm
and
sure nothing fascinates kids more than this is something you can't talk about. The adults are
right,
going to talk about
exactly.
this.
Yeah,
All
we can all
right.
relate to that. Absolutely. And
Yes.
so,
I
of
remember
course,
wishing my ears were like those big antennas. So I just pick up, oh, it must be something important. What are they saying?
Right, what's going on? Are they fighting? Are they getting a divorce? Um, and then of course, what she heard her father say was that he met an alien, and so she was very fascinated by it. And because this all happened so fast, and the celebrity of it happened so fast, I mean, this is all Tanya knew growing up.
Wow.
And so, I mean, they were affected by this as much as anybody else. I mean, they were afraid to leave their house. They'd have people camping in their driveway. It wasn't a normal upbringing.
Oh, well,
They,
and yeah,
oh, go ahead.
Keel described that in some depth in Mothman Prophecies, that this was not an orderly, neat process. They just had a horde of whomever, randos, as we might call them today,
Yeah.
just showing up at their house at all hours of day and night,
Yeah.
and just felt that they could just insert themselves into their life with no introduction. And so tell me about the alien guy. Like, well, who the hell are you, man? And by
Yeah.
the way, it's 1 a.m. I gotta go to work in the morning. What are you doing? And
Yeah.
it was like that for a long time, was it not?
It was, and people would come out. They wanted to catch a glimpse of the spaceman, and because the initial claim again was that Woody he had met this guy, and the guy said he was coming back. So people were waiting. They were waiting for the arrival. Was he showing up? And people would report odd characters that would show up in strange vehicles, that just didn't really fit the area. At old Appalachia. And was it Indrid and his buddies? It could have been. But Tanya says yes, sometimes it was. Now she says that, of course, as the families kind of grew closer, Indrid would start bringing his own family. And Indrid had at the time, I think at their youngest interaction, he had the two boys at the time, so he had two twin boys, Connor and Kennard, and his wife was also pregnant with a girl. But the two twins were Tanya's age, and so they got along great. They'd come over and they would have cookouts, and they were like fascinated by hot dogs. They really enjoyed them. Um, she tells the story in her book and all of the interviews that she does about how they were playing a game, and um well, they got in trouble for something, and then they decided to go play in the house. So when they go in the house, she goes to her brother's toy box and pulls out like a fake gun, like a toy gun. And both of the twin boys had a visceral reaction to it. They were terrified. You couldn't have guns. That wasn't normal, and it really kind of traumatized them. They're like, you guys just have these as toys? And of course, this one was a toy, but they don't even play with them like that. It has a different air about it. And
And this is 1960s America, where
right.
Gunsmoke is like the show to watch, and Rawhide and all of these,
Yeah,
where toy guns are as normal as peanut butter,
right.
but
Yeah.
not for them. And that's very interesting.
Yeah, not for them. They didn't understand why you would play with something like that. It's a weapon of destruction. So yeah, she tells that story. But yeah, I mean, they like I said, they would come over as a family and they would just have family time together. So she kind of continued to have this relationship with them. Now, while she is growing up, here's the fascinating part about it all, that I think is really interesting. While she's growing up, they're also growing up. However, the difference in lifespan between humans and Lanulosians is double. So they get twice as old as we are. So
Oh,
while they're aging slower than she is.
okay. So they don't double the age, they half the age. So,
Yes.
okay. Like from the age of 8, in the time a human becomes 12, they become 10.
Yes. Yep.
I just threw a math problem in there. It's a
And
story
you know what?
problem.
And it worked for me. I actually, I figured it out. But yes, I
Yes, that's
mean, so
okay.
as Tanya is developing and growing, and anybody that's listening that's a parent, you understand different ages, different stages. They're kind of falling behind. So eventually, as they progress in age, she kind of almost ended up being more of a mother figure to them rather than a sibling. because she
Well,
had that wisdom.
she's getting into her later teens, early 20s, and they're still basically kids.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Which would
So
make
it's
sense if everybody lived to be 200. Yeah, that'd probably be how it would work.
yeah, they slowly age. I mean, Indrid right now is middle aged, and he's I don't know, like 100 or something. He's he's up there. I have to check. I have to check. Well, the age thing. I mean, we'll get into it, but there's been some discrepancies there, so I don't know.
hmm just want to go back to one thing.
Sure.
If you could kind of tie it together, that you can't really understand the Mothman without understanding Indrid Cold and Woodrow Durenberger. Like, kind of, how's the connection there?
So, I mean, the only real connection there is that the Woodrow and Indrid meeting happened just a couple of days before the Scarberry Mallet incident with the Mothman happened. And they're in pretty decent proximity to each other. They're about a 40-mile difference.
And
Um,
just if I
mhm.
can interrupt for a
Sure.
second, Scarberry Mallet is where the couple is making out at the TNT area and they see the Mothman and they race to the police station.
Yes, that's yep.
Okay, okay, okay. Gotcha, gotcha,
Yep,
gotcha.
that's the one. Which ended up being um so where the Keel connection comes into play, because that's where all this is at, pretty much, is that Keel was in the area investigating the Indrid Cold meeting. And because he was already there, then he gets wind of this weird creature. I mean, this is how he gets involved with the Mothman. He gets wind of this couple being chased down by this weird creature. And then, of course, he kind of drops the Indrid stuff because he was investigating. Keel was an author. He's writing articles for, I believe it was a New York publication at the time, and he was covering UFOs. And what he had going on at that time was a massive, what seemed to be UFO flap happening all along the Ohio River. And so when he found somebody that actually had contact, and how could you not? The Woodrow stuff was all over the place. He comes down to investigate. While that's happening, these couples get chased off by this strange creature. So he runs off to that. Um, and starts investigating that. He's already in the area, I mean, he may as well. Again, 40 miles, it's not very far. So people kind of have taken this, Keel included, and have included the Indrid Cold saga into the Mothman saga and, run with it. Some people even hypothesize that the two are directly linked. I've heard it all. I've heard that maybe Indrid was a bounty hunter for the Mothman, and that's why he was here. I've heard that they were lovers. I've heard that the Mothman was his pet. Whatever the case may be.
Yeah, yeah, I bet you've heard it all on that subject.
Yeah,
But just to be clear, in Keel's, like what he reported, Woodrow never saw the Mothman.
no,
There's not like a direct connection, is there?
nope, not at all.
Okay.
And so, and what I tell people is that I can only go based off of Tanya's word. So, of course, at the time that she's alive and we're friends, I ask her all the questions. People have a question about Indrid, I ask her, and I don't have a choice but to take what she's saying as fact. And, when I ask her about the connection between Indrid and the Mothman, Indrid says there is none.
Interesting. And I guess, and I don't want to make this like a quiz on the Mothman prophecies, or I should have said something like, hey, read up on the Mothman prophecies again. But there were other strange people that Keel was encountering then that they look like humans, but they're not humans like us.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of, I'm going to mangle his name, but Apollo, it's basically like Apple. And there's people that are being contacted by entities that look walking down the street, regular human beings, but do seem to fit kind of a profile. And seem to be doing something that he never seems to really figure out. And it seems like
Yeah.
there's more than one of those. Like Indrid Cold wasn't necessarily alone.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
and Keel, when he described them pretty similarly in description to, to Indrid. They were always not white people. I guess I'll just say that they were people of color of some sort. Um,
well,
you
and if I
know,
can butt in,
sure,
he describes them as being like people from India,
yeah,
and which they're to my not to, and I have looked into this quite a bit myself. There was no like immigrant community of people from India in that area, just like at all, you know. But yet,
yeah.
a lot of people described that way pop up in this time frame with no explanation how they got here or why they left. But
Hmm.
it's a weird thing.
I mean, it can be. I think it definitely depends on how you view it. Unfortunately, Keel himself is not alive to really confront. But you do have to kind of wonder how much of it is anomalous and how much of it is just, John Keel's a racist. And I don't mean that in like, oh, you shouldn't read Mothman Prophecies. No, you absolutely should. It's just a lot of people were at the time. And it was unusual to see people of color in small town West Virginia. They weren't used to that. It was unusual to see somebody like John Keel in small town West Virginia. He even points that out in Mothman Prophecies.
I,
Eventually
where he thinks
these
he may have been mistaken for either the Men in Black or the
right.
devil.
Right. So I mean, yeah, it's hard not to notice folks like that. And what he some of them would talk about him. Some of them would like come in and ask different people questions about him and who he was. He thought that these were also tied into like anomalous phone calls that he would get, which we do kind of see a little bit of in the movie. Um, and then he would tie that in because he would see these people like messing with the phone lines and, stuff like that. So, but is that just coincidence? Is it anomalous? I'm not sure. And I think that probably that is also why he might have ascribed the Indrid Cold stuff to the Mothman stuff that was happening because, I agree. Maybe he mistook Indrid for being the same people, walking around messing with him specifically.
Well, and I don't think it's, hitting too hard to say that I think he was going through some severe, you know, difficulties psychologically during this whole time.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help that Gray Barker's, for we can say it on this show, fucking with him,
Yeah.
okay? And
Yeah.
sometimes prank calling him and,
Yep.
you know, messing with the mail. And yeah, I mean, to be very honest, the Mothman, and I doubt that you'll disagree with that, the Mothman story doesn't really end with the Silver Bridge collapse at
No,
all.
it doesn't.
Um, that's just Keel's way of wrapping things up. So he's, a writer, something of a journalist, and nice, tie up the bow, and I can stop dealing with this stuff before I go completely crazy. Does
Yeah.
that sound about right?
Yes. I'd agree with that. I don't know if it's necessarily for his own mental health or, just because he was done with it. I mean, Mothman Prophecies came
End of
out,
story. Yeah.
10 years after the events started. And so it's not like, he went and investigated it and then wrote the book and it came out right away. No, it was a lot. And he doesn't when he talks about Mothman prophecies, he doesn't just talk about things that were happening in that area. He goes on to quote other research that he's done, other similar creatures that people have seen to this thing or similar things that seem similar, but they're happening in, Nevada or whatever. I just
Yes,
made the
yes.
state. And so this was a very long time in the making. And so it definitely could have been after over the course of 10 years, him just going, look, I can't do this anymore. Let me just end it. And then that's that. It could have been him just trying to write a good story and not knowing how to end it. It's, somebody who has been working on projects surrounding an ongoing investigation. It's very hard to end them. I haven't yet. So I
That
get
is
it.
the toughest thing about.
Yeah.
I'm currently trying to do a nonfiction work. And the
Hmm.
problem with nonfiction is you can't just write it the way that'll wrap things up and we're
Right.
done. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
nonfiction keeps happening,
Right.
and it's tough to draw. Where's the end?
Yeah. It is. It
Do
is very hard.
anything, even with no paranormal content at all.
Yeah.
You know,
Right. There's always
it's
new
one of those.
facts, new things coming out,
Yes, yes, indeed.
new directions that you can take it in. And yeah, no, it's very difficult. And so, I can understand why he did it. But as, one of the current day Mothman researchers, I'm frustrated by it.
Yes, yes. And that narrative of it ended with the bridge collapse went everywhere and
Yeah.
became, oh, this other bridge collapsed over here. It was him. And
Right.
Chernobyl happened. He was there. And okay, maybe he wasn't,
Yeah.
and maybe
Yeah.
you're seeing things from a different angle because that's been suggested.
Right.
But yes, that's wow. A lot of just fascinating stuff of what was really going on during that period.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
people were showing up at his house, and he was
Hmm.
at some point living with Rob Steiger, and strange people were coming over at will and just trying to intimidate them. And it was a lot of, well, as you well know, I'm sure, originally he wanted to call Mothman Prophecies the Year of the Garuda. Am I
Hmm.
getting that right? Or,
That's correct. Yep.
yes. And they made him cut about half of it out, which became the Eighth Tower.
Right.
And so, yeah, it ends up very processed, what you get at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is why everybody should also read The Eighth Tower.
Absolutely. Um, I can't endorse that enough. Let's see. So, okay, I guess one thing I did want to ask you, um, you have a very, and I don't want to put this the wrong way, but you have what I think is very good, a critical approach to claims of the paranormal. And I don't mean one-on-one like anonymous experiencers, because that's different.
Hmm.
Um, if you've had an experience, I think you have essentially the same attitude that I do. I'm never going to tell you you didn't have that experience
Right.
because I wasn't there. It's not my place to tell you what you didn't have. But if somebody's promoting, especially publicly, and especially when there's money involved and fame and such, you tend to want some proof, some evidence, something, you know, why this isn't just a good career move for you. You know, did dealing with Tanya Derenberger challenge that at all, or was that a difficulty at all?
Well, yeah. I mean, of course, I went into this not believing any of the Indrid stuff, especially because, the most recent thing that had happened in the Indrid story was that Indrid was dead, but then all of a sudden he wasn't. And I was like, oh yeah, this is bullshit. And you know,
That's the Ashers I know and love.
right. I mean,
This is
just
bullshit.
being frank, it was like, okay, all right, something weird's going on here. And this ended up being the relationship that I would kind of have with this case, because the person that was going, I have another researcher that works with me, and she doesn't really buy any of it. And that's good because it challenges me, right? If I can't disprove what she's saying, then either it is bullshit or I'm just not very good at my job, right? So, she goes along with me to physically meet Tanya and to talk to her. And we've done so much research. Well, I'd come across a comment one day, and it was about, it was somewhere on social media, and it was about whether or not Tanya was even really Woodrow Derenberger's daughter, because Tanya's name was Tanya Bowman. It wasn't Tanya Derenberger, it was Tanya Bowman. And they had pointed out that on Woodrow's obituary, Tanya's not listed anywhere.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And so, of course, we were like, oh my God, we've been just absolutely had. That's the first thing we should have checked, right? Let's make sure. But nobody questioned it because everybody in the community, that's Tanya Danberg, that's Woodrow's daughter, Tanya. So, I mean, dug deep. We built the whole ancestry tree. And things got really interesting at that point, because we did find that, yes and no, Tanya's his daughter. Tanya is his daughter, but only because he adopted her by marrying the wife and
Oh,
Tanya's mom.
wow. So she's
Hmm.
kind of a stepdaughter?
Kind of a stepdaughter, but it was a legal adoption that
Oh,
happened.
yes, yes, I get you. But yeah, okay,
Um,
I
but
think
yes,
yeah, wow.
more his stepdaughter. Now, of course, some people would be initially they'd be like, "Oh, well, Tanya believes in Indrid and Woodrow believes in Indrid. It was mental illness. It was genetic." Well, it wasn't mental illness. We know that because Woodrow was
Uh-huh.
cleared by a psychologist. But we also know that because it's not his biological daughter. Why she didn't show up in the obituary, I don't know. I didn't get an answer to that question. I didn't ask her. But it
And
didn't
small town
matter,
newspapers 70 years ago,
right?
it could be
Who
a lot of
knows?
things.
So right, it didn't matter because we'd traced back the family. We knew who the mom who her mom was, what her name was. We could go, but we saw the marriage records. Woodrow was married before he married her, even, and so this was the second marriage for both of them. So it's like we would kind of be like, we couldn't just prove what Tanya was saying. We would be like, oh, here's something though, here's something, and then it would just fall apart, and we'd be like, okay, I guess she was honest about that. And it became really difficult to know what was real and what wasn't. But my biggest thing that came forward, and I haven't talked about it a lot yet publicly, but I have been giving lectures about Indrid now, and I did talk about it then, was in the fall. So Tanya passed away May of 2023. So this was the fall of 2022. She had kind of disappeared for a while. And, I mean, it had been like a month since I'd heard from her, and that was unusual. We usually talked really frequently, and then she
Oh,
wasn't on social media at all. And so I did the only thing I thought to really do, and I just got on her Facebook page and I made a post like, "Hey, has anybody heard from Tanya?" It's still there. You can go look at it. And one of her daughters sends me a message and, lets me know that Tanya's okay. She's in the hospital. Like I said, when I met her, she was in really bad shape with her MS. I think that I actually have the final autographed copy of her book because she just
oh,
physically
wow.
couldn't do it anymore. But yeah, I mean, she'd be in and out of the hospital a lot. It was pretty standard. But of course her daughter, before I even really get the chance to like say anything, she introduces herself to me as Tanya's daughter. Her name was Ashley. Well, I knew that because Tanya obviously had mentioned that she had a daughter named Ashley. She loved that name.
Yes.
Um, and then the daughter goes on to like, I don't know, spill the beans, trauma dump. I mean, she was like really, really honing it in that her and her mom do not have a good relationship. Her mom is not a good person. Even to the point of like, she didn't call her mom, she called her Tanya the whole
Wow.
time.
Hmm.
And, she's telling me, oh, she just, she rips people off all the time. She steals people's money. She's a con artist. Don't ever give her any money, please. Don't ever give her any money. And she's probably going to use this to try to get sympathy, to try to get money out of people. And I was like, oh, okay, well, that's okay. And so in my mind, I'm like, here it is. This is gonna be it. She's gonna drop the bomb on me and be like, yeah, all the injured stuff is not real. I'm expecting it. And she asked me, how do you know my mom? Of course, I'm some 30-something-year-old woman from Ohio, why do you know my mom? And I told her it was because of the injured stuff. And she then, I mean, she goes on to share a lot more personal things, and I'm not gonna tell anybody word for word. That's her
No,
story to
no, no.
share.
I wouldn't expect you to.
But she was just like, "Oh yeah, we all know about the Indrid stuff, and I don't really know. I don't really know if it's real, if it's not. I can't say for sure that it isn't." And just kind of talks about it nonchalantly. I mean, she did tell me that, she does believe that maybe her mom embellishes some of the stuff, some of the story. But
Mhm.
she's not here to tell people what to believe in and not believe in. And it just seems so odd to me because before this woman wrote me a novel about how much of a scam artist and terrible person that her mother was. This was
Mhm.
her chance to really throw her under the bus and get
Oh,
revenge.
absolutely. That's what I would expect is
And
that,
she
oh, you
didn't.
fell for that? It's totally fake. And she doesn't
Right.
say that.
She doesn't
Wow.
say that. And so, to me, at the absolute minimum, this tells me that Tanya has been talking about this her whole life, that she believes that this is happening, whether or not it is or isn't. Of course, the daughters never claimed to have met Indrid. We went on to have more in-depth conversations, not about Indrid, just about life in general, just about coping with having shitty parents, basically. And
Yes, yes.
I bonded over that a little bit. Well, she was the one that reached out to me when Tanya had passed away.
Oh,
And they were kind of talking about uh maybe having a little service or something. I had offered, I said, hey, if you need help paying for the funeral, let me know. Like the internet they got this. It's Tanya Derenberger. Like they got this. She's like, no, it's fine. Um, and different stuff like that. And we just kind of, said our goodbyes and that was it. And I told her, I said, look, I want to talk to you one day about this stuff. You don't have to talk to me. I probably seem like a crazy person to you, but I'd love to get a statement, an official statement from you that I can share with everybody. And but not right now. I get it. Your mom just passed away. We're not gonna do that right now. It's fine. She never really responded, and that's okay. Well, I did reach out to her kind of recently because I was doing this lecture on Indrid Cold, and it had been enough time. It had been a year at that point, and not just that. I wanted to know. Tanya said she had a picture of Indrid. I've never seen it. Nobody's ever seen it. And, I wanted to know if she had it. I wanted to know if she had anything. Tanya had all this stuff. She had, Woodrow's clearance from the psychologist. She's had original manuscripts. I mean, where is it? What can we, don't give it to me, but damn, give me a copy. What's it going to
yes,
take?
yes.
Um, and just, in general, I didn't want to really mention the family unless I kind of had their blessing. And not just that, I had the first chapter of Tanya's brand new book that she was working on. I still have it. And can I just go and publish it into my own book? Absolutely, I can. Would that be real shitty of me to do without consulting the family? Absolutely, it would. So I wanted to talk business with her, and she still hasn't responded to me. So
Hmm.
I don't know if she will. I'm not gonna pester her about it. But immediately after she passed, another one of her daughters commented on my podcast goes on YouTube. I don't really advertise the YouTube. It just doesn't make me money, right? Like Spotify does, if I'm perfectly honest. But it's there, and the videos go up there. Some people listen over there. Well, she had commented on the episode where I interviewed Tanya, and she had thanked me for having her on the show, for having a place now where she could hear her mom's voice forever. And
That's really cool.
but it wasn't like she's a terrible person and all this Indrid stuff wasn't real. I mean, they're not saying it didn't happen. They're not saying it did happen. But it makes me wonder a lot. And, I kind of have my own speculations otherwise. So, of course, just with all this and the entire friendship, again, I'd ask her questions. I'd ask her the same questions over and over again and write down her answer, what they were, and compare notes. Are they the same or are they, similar enough where, it
Yes,
doesn't,
yeah. Often memories do change over
yeah,
years and decades. Yeah.
but facts, his birthday's one of them. How old is
Yeah.
he?
That'd be pretty solid. Yeah.
And it always changes and but it's
Hmm.
never, but maybe it could be old age. Sometimes I don't know how old I am, and I'm only
Oh
33.
yeah. Well,
I know
it gets
that.
a lot easier as you get older. No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. And so, is it he was always dancing around between like 94 and 101, and so
Mhm.
again, is it because she just genuinely doesn't really remember? Because like I don't know. If I got to think about my mom's birthday, I have to remember what year she was born in. Then I have to count from that. Then I second guess myself. Was that the year she was born in? You know? Um did I get it
Oh
wrong?
yes, I know only too well. You first of all, if you woke me up in the middle of the night and asked me what year it was, I probably wouldn't say 2024.
Right.
I'd probably get that one wrong. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, that's just kind of how it works in the human mind and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I
Um,
mean, was it a lie or was it just misremembering because we're human? And also, the woman was sick to death with MS. I can't.
which if you don't, and I hope I'm saying this the right way, but it's a thing that when people, okay, when humans encounter non-human intelligences, which are supposedly more advanced, why can't they cure their fairly, mundane health conditions? You
Yeah.
know, you can fly from here to Lanyulos and you can't cure MS. You haven't cured that like 1,000 years ago.
Well, but that might be the issue. I
And
mean,
I'm
just,
begging the question. I mean, maybe there's a greater purpose for not doing that or something, but that does seem to come up from time to time.
if it's something that hasn't existed in 1,000 years, and it comes back. So, like, let's just use a virus, for example, on their planet. Because before Woodrow would go to Lanulos, he'd have to get super vaccinated. So that was a
Wow.
process. Yeah, that was a process that took place on their ship because they didn't have those diseases. So during the trip there on the ship, they would shoot him up with a bunch of stuff, and he'd get boosted and everything for all this stuff. And so if it's a virus, just let's say they cure the common cold and it's not been around for 1,000 years. What did somebody
You're
throw
right.
out
It
that
might come back
paperwork?
as a pandemic from hell, and
Right.
we haven't faced it in 100 generations. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, is it like I said, how long do you hang on to the cure for the common cold until you throw it away because it hasn't been around for 800 years now?
Yes, and that's a very, current day problem that we're facing is
Yeah.
the glaciers melt and things come out that have been
Oh
frozen
yeah.
for millennia. And so we don't have any immunity to them because we haven't had to deal with them in our
Right.
lineage as far back as you can go. And suddenly they might be a problem. That I threw a softball and you knocked it out of the, but that's why. Okay, that
Well,
makes
and
sense.
maybe something like MS never existed for them at all. We don't
And
know.
that's true too.
I
Mhm.
I should have probably asked her more about that. That's a damn good question. I wish I would have thought of that when she was here.
There's so many things that you go over and you kind of wonder. I'm glad you mentioned the Woodrow being cleared by a psychiatrist because this whole thing made me think of, I'm going to mangle the pronunciation because it's French, but folie à deux, where the delusion of two, where one or more, one, but two or maybe three people agree that this thing that's not happening is happening. And I wondered if you ever suspected that with her.
Yeah, absolutely, I have. Of course. As a matter of fact, I think that I don't think you're ready for the conclusion yet in what I think. Because it's a hard one. And it's a hard one for me to accept, and it's a hard one for I think a lot of people to accept. Um,
Well, let me just hold you there. And you're
sure.
right. I can't handle the truth at this moment.
Well, I want to mention the psychologist for a second and the
Okay.
clearance of that. Here's the crazy thing about it is that yes, he was psychologically evaluated and cleared from having any type of delusional mental illness, things like that. But that wasn't why the psychologist vouched for him. The reason the psychologist vouched for him was because he knew Indrid was real, because he talked to him.
Wow.
Indrid talked to him, telepathically talked to him.
Wait, it gets even better. It was telepathic. I thought
Yeah,
like maybe he came in the room and sat
nope.
down.
Nope, he telepathically spoke to him. They never met in person and
Yes.
introduced
Oh,
himself. Yep. And that was a huge deal. Because this is somebody with a profession to protect that went on the line saying, no, this is real, and I know it's real because it happened to me. And that was massive. Now, could he have had a quack doctor? I guess so. But they didn't, it's not like they were friends. He wasn't friends with this guy. They didn't know each other. They didn't plan this. That guy never went on to make any money or, tell his adventures with Indrid Cold.
no. I don't even know if it may have destroyed his career. Um, because yes, I've heard of it has been like forever since I've heard of this. But
Mhm.
you just kicked it loose in my mind. Yes, that's right. He was seeing a very legitimate, licensed professional.
Yep.
I can't recall if it's psychiatrist or psychologist,
He's a
but a
psychologist. Yep.
okay. So person with a PhD and a license and a
Yep.
professional base. And then he starts getting the voice of Indrid Cold in his head.
Yeah. Yep.
And that changed everything in his life. And I'm gonna guess very little for the positive.
Yeah,
Wow.
because that was one thing that they could do with Indrid. You kind of mentioned earlier, you can't just summon him. Yes and no, because they had this constant like brain tie to him. Like they could
Wow.
talk to him anytime they wanted to, and didn't mean he had to answer, right? People get busy, you know. Just like I could call you whenever, but
Leave a
you don't have to
voicemail.
answer. Right. But yeah, I mean that was another part of this was that strange, mental tie that they had to each other, this phone line that they had constantly, and the psychologist ended up getting the same thing. So it was odd. No, he like I said, he never really elaborated. He never really went into detail about what that experience was like for him. And who knows, maybe it changed him. I don't know. I'm sure it did. But he didn't go on to go to conferences and sell books and do all that. And so
He did
I think
not join the world of ufology or
no,
the
he didn't.
paranormal at all.
He didn't. So I mean that's very telling. That's a very important part of the story. And that's one of those things. I mean, that's what I mean is that you hear something so ridiculous, like, oh, there's this planet and we're all Christians and we're all living in peace and it's great.
And we're
And you're
nude.
like, Christians, really?
We only eat
Um,
fruit.
right. But then you get people like the psychologist, and you're just like, what in the world is going on here? You know?
Yes,
It's
yes.
frustrating.
It is just such a bizarre case. The similar thing, I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, um, but President Eisenhower's granddaughter insists that the treaty with the aliens is real. And, you know, that sounds about as ridiculous to me. It sounds about as ridiculous as it gets. But she does make these claims that her grandfather did sign a treaty with alien forces that could abduct so many people and they give us this technology. And I mean, that just sounds like something that's not even worth my time to read about, except it
Right.
really is President Eisenhower's granddaughter. And that makes, I don't endorse it, but it makes me wonder. You know what I mean? I can't not wonder about
Yeah. I haven't dug into that one too much. I
it.
want
Nor
to.
have I. Yeah.
I'm curious about it. I've heard about it a lot. It comes up a lot. But I've only been doing this for not even 5 years, so I'm still a newbie, believe it or not. And you only got so much time in a day, but I definitely
Oh,
want
yeah.
to tap into that one a bit.
And let me hit you with just a couple of questions, which are totally, I don't know, nothing here is mandatory. It's like,
Sure.
I'm not paying you for this or anything, but which I appreciate. But do you have any opinion of the appearance of Tanya on the second season of Hellier?
I mean, I do. They're not good opinions. I mean, they're my opinions, right? And all opinions are
Yes, and I'm not trying to put
opinions.
you on the spot. If you want to no
Um,
comment, that's perfectly fine too.
I don't know what the deal was. She just didn't seem like herself. I mean, I know that when they went and saw her, she was in like a nursing care facility. So she wasn't at home, which yes, could happen with Tanya, right? She'd be in and out of the hospitals or, whatever. But just even the way she talked, like to me, she seemed like she was like on a bunch of drugs and was out of it.
Mhm.
And I just thought the portrayal of it was kind of dirty, but it's not necessarily their fault because they didn't know her, they just and
And
she
you
agreed to
go
do it.
there and you get what you get. This is what the person's like today.
Right.
And somebody who has a serious illness and is on a lot of legit medication for it, because
Yeah.
last stages of MS, are not photogenic. They're hard to deal with.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that she did or she did not, but people in this type of situation do usually end up with some type of drug dependency, drug issues, So yeah, I'm sure she was, she was on some extreme medications. It's a very painful disease to live with. And of course when you're in the hospital, they're just pumping it in all the time. So,
Oh yeah,
um,
there's a
you
lot
know,
of
she
things.
just she just seemed very I mean, like if like that was of course one of the first times I ever saw Tanya, and it was such a drastic difference between that and like who she really was. I was like, oh, well, they made you look crazy. And again, it's not necessarily their fault. But yeah, and the whole story of it was just kind of cut short, but I get it because they don't know each other. They didn't have that good rapport. They're interviewing her this one-off time and sitting and talking with her. Now, they had said, I know there was kind of some behind the scenes drama about certain expectations that Tanya might have had. Like I think that they demanded that she brought her food or something, and like she was very demanding and just seemed kind of like she was just profiting off of the appearance. And she might have been. She might have been.
Which, I mean, okay, you're asking me to be on TV. I mean, do I have to do it for free, or can I,
Very fair point.
can I get a burger in here? I mean, is that too much to
Right.
ask?
Yeah, right. At least damn.
You know?
So I know that they had some type of falling out, but I didn't really get involved with it too much just because I don't really like to
No, I,
partake.
I, I certainly am not trying to stir the pot here at all. I was just, if you didn't want to answer that, that's fine. I didn't
She
have
was,
a strong opinion on it myself.
yeah,
Other than that, there's only so many people who've publicly interviewed Tanya at all,
right. Yeah.
and so I kind of had to bring it up.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that Indrid was definitely part of their story arc, right, for the Hellier stuff. Um,
Yes,
but
and a very interesting one that
it is.
one could
It
draw a lot of
is.
conclusions. I don't know what's the right one.
Yeah. Now,
And it,
Tanya, if they did have this falling out, of course, I've been asked by people, is Indrid visiting other people? I've had people come to me and say that they've had encounters with Indrid Cold,
wow,
and I don't necessarily know if they have or haven't. I wasn't there, but it doesn't like track typical Indrid, you know, lore from what I know from Tanya's side. And, I asked Tanya about it. Now she does have people that she's pointed out Indrid has never met, that she feels like they're just profiting off of her story. It's not, they're not a part of it. But she does admit that, like, she doesn't know what he does in his spare time like that. He could very much be visiting other people. As a matter of fact, a part of the Woodrow line of the lore was that there were humans from Earth that opted to live on Lanulos. I mean, other Lanulosians were visiting people from Earth, not just Indrid. And
wow.
so, yeah, which is very interesting. But he talks about like a couple that were there, that were from Earth that had been there for a couple of years now, because they liked it better. They just wanted to move, right? They wanted to change the scenery, so they did.
Destination location. Yeah, there you are.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not like it's impossible for Indra to go on and have these different relationships with different people to different degrees. It just doesn't feel right. And I have no scientific evidence of there's proof that this wasn't happening. But it just doesn't sit right with me, based off of what I know. And again, I can only take Tanya at her word. Now, if they had this big falling out and Indrid is such a big part of their story arc, I would think that Tanya would call them out and be like, oh no, absolutely, Terry Wrist is not Indrid, and that wasn't Indrid, and this isn't Indrid. But she never did, you know?
Which is, yes, that's very interesting. And without, recapping both seasons of Hellier, which is not really what we came here to do tonight at all. Um, I wondered if you had any thoughts, and no is perfectly fine answer, about Alan Greenfield and the secret cipher of the Ufnots. And I believe Indrid Cold is involved in that book, um,
Yeah.
which I've had some success reading, but man, it's quite esoteric, you might say.
Yes. So we've actually had Alan Greenfield on the show. He is,
On Wednesdays, we talk where?
yep,
Oh,
yep,
awesome.
yep. Alan Greenfield is on the show. I did nothing and he talked the whole time, and which
As
it's
a
fine.
podcast host, I mean, he's probably an ideal guest because he just
Yeah,
steals your
right.
content. But yes,
I got
yes,
I got to take a
great
good
guy.
break. But the problem is that it's hard to control the conversation with Greenfield. And the guy has so much interesting stuff to say. He really does. He is a fucking riot.
Oh
Go
yeah,
listen to that. If you've never heard my show before, go listen to the On Wednesdays We Talk Weird
I
episode with Alan
I've got to
Greenfield.
catch up on that one. I
Yeah,
I had the great privilege to meet him in person one time, and man, it was fascinating.
he's a character,
Oh, he's a brilliant guy,
Yeah,
and he's one of a kind. That is
yeah.
for sure.
Absolutely. So reading his books, I can understand it is difficult, because because he's him. I would love to really curate a better relationship with Greenfield, and be on a more casual terms with him than we are currently. We still, we'll message back and forth, joke back and forth, or whatever on social media, but nothing serious. To kind of get more in his head about all of this, and maybe I will, maybe I'd better. He's not going to be around forever.
I
Some of
believe
his,
he's about 80. Now
yeah, he's
he's
he's up
that
there,
seems like the type of guy that could live for a good long time.
right?
But yeah, we always
Um,
think that, one never knows.
yeah. While we were recording, I remember he had his groceries got delivered. It was very normal for somebody like Alan Greenfield. But anyway, I definitely would love to hear his piece about Indrid and, deep dive that a little bit more. But like I said, he can be difficult to talk to. He's easy to listen to, but he's hard to have a conversation with.
That was
And
very well put. Yes. He's
yeah,
driving. You're lucky
yeah,
if you can get a word in there.
exactly. So I guess I'd probably have just put it off for that reason. But he's made some really extraordinary claims about a lot of things, and I can't say whether or not those claims are true or not. Again, it's hard to talk to him directly about them and try to really deep dive those topics. Because he'll touch on one thing and then it's off to the races again and he's somewhere else. And so I don't know. I like him on a personal level. I
Oh,
really like the
yes.
guy.
He's
Um,
a great guy to hang out with.
yeah,
A grandfatherly figure that is just cool as hell.
yeah. I'd like to have a beer with them at least
Oh
once a month.
yeah.
That'd be really fun. So
Trust me,
that's
it
what I have to
is.
say
It
about him.
is. It was Strange Realities 21, and I was able to hang out with him, just him and me sitting on a couch having a couple. And yeah, he did most of the talking, but it was fascinating. I'm just like, wow, this is really cool.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
Found like a guru in his natural state, and I can just sit there and, oh, really? Tell me more.
Yeah.
It was cool. Um, I guess, um, I is there anything you'd like to add before I hit you with the final question?
I don't think so.
Okay, okay. Um, what is your, and I'm certainly not going to hold you to it like it's binding or anything, but what is your opinion? What is your assessment of the whole Indrid Cold, Woodrow Durenberger, Tanya Durenberger? What do you think happened?
So I feel like I had come to a conclusion, of course, after Tanya passed. Of course I grieved like a normal person. She was my friend,
Yes, yes.
and but it kind of put it back in the front of my mind more at that point. And I really wanted to sit with it for a while. One thing that I knew going into this friendship with Tanya, not necessarily right in the beginning, but one thing we kind of agreed on, was that it was kind of my lot to keep this story alive when she wasn't here anymore. She entrusted me to do that and, to continue on telling the story of Injured Cold. And I knew that as her health was declining, and of course we talked about it, I kind of started feeling the pressures, right, of being the one. And which of course I wanted to meet him before that happened so we could
Yes,
really,
yes.
get somewhere with it. But she just, I mean, really the last year of her life, she was just not well. And it's no fault of her own. I don't blame her there. that we couldn't really have more time to sit down or try to facilitate a meeting because she was mostly in the hospital all the time. That's understandable. So of course I stop and think about it a little bit more, and I, just go over all my notes about the years, all the recorded conversations we've had, rereading her book, rereading the next chapter in the second book. Um, I think that Indrid was a very real person. I think that Woodrow had a very unique relationship, something that most of us won't experience with somebody who was not of our planets, our dimension, whatever you want to
Wow.
call it. I do think that is true. I think that Tanya, grew up with this very different life. It's a life that you or we can't imagine having an
No,
uncle
I won't
alien
even
around.
try to pretend that. No.
Right. Um, but I don't think I think when the family split up and they all moved, I think that was the last that Tanya saw of Indrid. Um, I don't think that she continued to have a relationship with him. And I think that all of this, kind of her carrying on the torch, telling the story, was a way for her to cope with the trauma of it all because Indrid took her father from her. And, we got to remember she was very young. But this was her second dad. And things like this that happen to children that are at a certain age group that we know end up affecting them in ways that aren't immediately obvious. We're very aware of that. We're aware of people that have triggers from things that happen to them at, 1 to 2 years old when they don't even have memory of those things happening and can't recover that memory, but can still have triggers from those events. And so again, I think that this was a coping mechanism for her, and I think that for her, if she spoke about Indrid enough, because he was real, and everybody else in the world says he's not, and this figure that you are subconsciously blaming the downfall of your family on is not real. I think that if she felt like she could talk about him enough, she could have another meeting with him again, and it would validate her, even a little bit, right? That this
Yes, yes.
catalyst was real.
The story
um
makes sense.
yeah.
Yes.
And
It's a better
so,
story whether it ever actually happened exactly like that.
yeah.
It's a more healing story
Yeah. I
if
think
you
that
put it this way.
I think she very much believed in Injured because I think he was real. I think he was around. But then, like I said, they didn't have that relationship going forward. Now, like I said, this was about a year ago after she had passed away that I kind of came to this conclusion. But then And so, how I kind of mentioned earlier, I will be like, well, okay, Indrid's not real, and then something happens, something strange happens, and it pulls me back in. So, for people that have listened to my show for a long time, I did get a new co-host at the beginning of the year, Tobias Whalen, and we've been kind of just working on what we're gonna do with the show next. We start playing with the idea of, well, what's big? What do people? Kind of, we're trying to see how to get more young people into these topics, um, and because right now most of our demographic is over 40, and that's fine, but like, you want your show to do good. So,
Yes,
um,
yes.
we want to figure out how to get the young folks over. Well, TikTok, right? TikTok's a great option to, promote, and it would be super easy to do. Let's work on TikTok. So I have re-downloaded the app, and I had made a TikTok years ago. Well, not years ago, just when it first came out, So I already had, a login just for my personal page, and I was gonna kind of play with it and see how it worked because I'm an old person. I don't even know how it works. And
It's just funny because you're not that much older than my daughter. So like it's like, oh, I'm old now. Yeah, okay, whatever, kid. I'm talking
I'll
about
take the
real old.
compliment. I'll take it. But I'm just too old to grasp the hip new things easily. So I'm on there and I'm trying to play with it, and I get bored, I put it down, I forget about it. We're doing other things, right? We just added a theme song to the show for the first time ever, and it only took 7 months for us to do it. Um, things take time. But
Tobias has been a great addition, by the way. That your
thank you.
chemistry is really good with him. That's excellent.
Yeah, he's knows his shit. I'm like,
Oh yeah.
it's great. But anyway, so I put it down, and then now, of course, I'm receiving notifications from TikTok, and when you like become active on the app, then it like tells everybody in your contacts, right? Is they're like, oh, Asher's is on TikTok, um, so people start following me again or whatever. But I get this notification, and it says Tanya Derenberger and four other people are following you, and I'm like, okay, here we go. I kind of thought that maybe people, once Tanya passed, would try to cash in on her a little bit. Anybody can say anything now, right? It's a free for
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
She's dead. She's not going to be here to refute it, right? People could be like, "Well, the spirit of Tanya is following me around."
Yes. And unfortunately, there are people that'll do stuff like that. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
there are. There are. So I'm kind of now have become the protector of that. So I'm like, okay, let's go see. I'm gonna go mess some people up. I get on TikTok and I look at the profile. It wasn't a new notification because you have your set notifications. So, I look it up and I go see if Tanya herself was following me, and she was. She'd also made a TikTok when she was around and, got on it. There's no videos or anything on it. I think there's a lot of those kind of empty profiles from people that started to try to use it and got off of it. But it was hers, and I
I am
just thought,
guilty. Yes.
right, I
I
just
heard
thought,
about it. All the kids are into it. You can dance to
right.
it.
Let me try it out. Never made anything. Great. Logging off
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of people. So, I go and I look, it's her profile. It's
Oh.
definitely hers. And but I just thought maybe it's because I wasn't on the app for a while. The notifications are catching up, right? Maybe I had deleted it before I got the notification she was following me, and maybe it's on there now. Um,
But
this
it
is
makes you
how
wonder. You just can't completely set it aside.
well, at that time I did. At that time
Okay.
I did. And then about a month later it happened again. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. And it happens again. It's happened 8 times now.
Oh wow.
Um,
That is something. I don't know what it is, but it's something. Wow.
and I get notifications about new people following me, and I open the app and I go and look, about who is it, who's following me, and I'll see them, and
Mhm.
then the notifications right there on the list. It's never a new Tanya. And when I go and look at the people that follow me, it's just the one Tanya that's following me. And so Um, I've asked people because I don't know how TikTok works. It's just normal. Does it just do that? Why is it always
Mhm.
Tanya Derenberger and such people are following you? I mean, what is the deal with that? And I think people don't understand what I'm asking, because then people are like, "Oh yeah, it's just a bot account. It's just spam. It's not. It's not.
No, yeah, it's more complicated than that.
It's her profile and she's dead and nobody's using it. Well, as far as I can tell, nobody's using it. There's no way to like get an activity log, right? To see if anybody's
Mhm.
logging on. People
Somebody
people
would
have
have had to
asked,
hack it though, right?
well, right. People have asked, maybe her account was hacked. Maybe it's one of her kids, but like she didn't have a cell phone when she died.
Wow.
Um it gotten stolen from her by her roommates just
Wow.
the month before. She had to use the hospital phone. I mean, you know, people don't understand the nuances to it that make it anomalous. And I understand I need to keep myself in check and make sure that there's not a reasonable explanation for this. But so far, I have not been able to find one. And I, right before this happened, I had been talking with other people that do other things in the paranormal. And I have been curious as to how I can get into contact with Indrid Cold. What can I do to send a message out there in order to try to contact this person if he exists? And I have reached out to people that are into, the occult, necromancy, talking to the dead. People that are into CE5 has been a thing lately. I found a medium that allegedly has contact with aliens, and I'm going to work with them. And they've never contacted a specific one before, but we're going to work together and see what we can do. This was all before these notifications started happening. So then they start happening, and it's like, what is this? Is this a hello? Is this an olive branch? Is he
I
reaching
would
out?
never write that off as not being possible.
Isn't it so weird? And like I said, I try to disprove it because you said it. I'm the skeptical one, right? I'm the asshole of the community. People don't like me for
Those are
it.
two separate things.
It's true though. People get mad because I don't believe in just everything, but like that's the
Because the
person that I
shadow under the
am.
tree wasn't a flesh and blood Bigfoot.
Right.
Sorry, man.
Yeah. Oops. I mean, people I think kind of get that by now. We'll do whole shows about topics, and at the end of it, we're like, well, it was just all nothing. It was just all bullshit. The John Cheater episode we just did, we're like, yeah, it wasn't really a time traveler. Sorry. We err on the side of skepticism here,
It
and
was just so, it was such a tight week. I just could not get a chance to comment on that because you guys killed that. And
thank you.
I, John Teeter drives me nuts. Not currently, I mean, he's not figured that much anymore, but that he would go and be talking in 2000 and 2001, and all he's talking about is Waco. And
Yeah.
like a big event's going to come up, if you kind of know what I mean, in the New
Yeah.
York area.
Yeah.
If you would have said that, even if you were kind of evasive, but you would have said in this fall something terrible is going to happen, you'd have so much credibility. And you just didn't know what the hell was going to happen because you were just a regular person. You
Right.
know, I compared it to like going back to America in 1940, 1941, and never mentioning Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Which you got all this stuff to say about stuff that happened in the 30s. No, man,
Well, of course,
not a
the
teeter guy.
explanation. It's because it was a different time. It was a different world line or whatever you called it.
Yes. In which case, so then what value is there in anything that he says? Because it's
Right.
just some other line. I guess that didn't happen there. So then what the hell good are you? Move along. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
I
So I
digress.
mean, but just the point being, like I said, I don't just blindly believe anything. Um, and when something is truly anomalous, and I've tried to explain this to people, and this is the part that's so frustrating about this community, because people are like, well, you have a bias, you want to believe. Of course, I want to believe. But when something truly anomalous happens, you just feel it. You just feel it in your core. And I don't know how else to get that across to folks unless you've experienced it. I wish that I could take that feeling and bottle it up and share it with the rest of the world. I can't. And that's the part where the science becomes very difficult. How do you explain that this is intuitive when we already don't recognize intuition as anything more than pseudoscience? It's tough. Um, but
And so many of these experiences are so personal
yeah,
that you're never going to test it in a lab. There's nothing you can do that's going to convince anybody who's not the person it happened to.
yeah.
That I've had a handful in my whole life, but those have a different quality than
Hmm.
something that I could say, well, maybe I saw this and maybe it was something else.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, I'll usually take a screenshot of them and I'll share them on social media when they happen. Not all of them. I take a screenshot of all of them. I didn't the first time. And I don't even think I did the second time, but after that, I was like, I gotta document this.
Yeah.
I'll take a screenshot of it and, but like I said, I don't post all of them because sometimes I'm looking at really personal things or having a personal conversation and it happens. And I don't want to put that out there and that's fine. But I have them. And it wasn't just that. It wasn't just that. The Indrid Cold talks just started becoming more rampant. People are now getting really interested in this topic. And like you said, I'm kind of the person to go to on it, right? Like I said, that's kind of the lot that I accepted when I when I took this on, um, which I don't hate. Like I said, it's kind of nice. But people have been talking about it a lot. So I've been going on shows and we've been talking about it. And normally, um, it didn't happen this episode, and that's good. But normally, there's of course some type of something that happens. There's some type of somebody's internet goes out, somebody's computer's not working, somebody's microphone isn't working, um, and it's only when we start talking about Indrid, and then once we change the subject, it stops. And could that also be again a series of coincidences, right? You know as well as I know in podcasting, shit happens.
Oh, things go
But
wrong all the time.
yeah,
This has been so
right,
far so good, knock on wood.
right,
One of the less technically disabled episodes. So just hoping
sure.
it keeps going. Probably because
Right.
I'm so little known, small potatoes market that the force has not become aware of me. But
This isn't a concern. It's fine. Um, but normally it does happen. And again, is it just because shit happens, or is it because it's significant? I can't answer that. I won't say for sure that it is significant because I do have to hold myself accountable to my own bias. And, I don't know yet. But I was more than happy to put this to bed as, Indrid's just simply not here anymore. And I don't know if I believe that now. So
oh,
we'll see.
wow. That shall be interesting what the future holds, by all means.
Yeah, we'll definitely. I mean, I've been documenting, contacting Indrid for a minute. Not to tease another piece of work that I might put out there, but
Feel free, whatever you've
I might
cared
put
to
something out
discuss.
there. Well, I know, but then people have expectations. With ongoing investigations, I just
Sure.
can't promise you anything. But I have now that I know what I know, now that I've been doing this for a minute, I've gotten pretty good at being able to kind of document along the way of what's going on. Um, then the more I talk to people about it, of course, people have their own situations. I'm going to share this tidbit real quick of when I gave my first Indrid Cold lecture this June at the Whitville UFO Festival in Virginia. And first and foremost, not to brag, but I think I had the largest audience there. And again, it's not a brag. It's just that I think people really are genuinely very interested in this topic.
Oh,
Um,
yes, yes.
and at the end of it, at the very end, when I walked off the stage, I had a gentleman come up to me. He's a teacher there. He wanted to know if I knew anything about a particular family. And this is where I could use your help, audience. He had mentioned to me that in a cemetery in North Carolina, in Mount Airy, there is a headstone there with the last name's Overby. It's two of them. And on the headstones, it mentions just out of nowhere, um, that these people had contact with, I think it's like life from another planet between the years, get this, 1927 to 1933. This is old. This predates a lot of
Kenneth
UFO
Arnold
lore.
and Roswell and all of that.
Right.
Foo Fighters, it goes way back.
Exactly. And so they wanted to know, and of course they showed me a picture of the gravestone. I looked and got a better picture of the gravestone. It's there. It's a mother and son. The son worked for some type of military. I don't think we know what. The mother says she only had contact from those years. The son says from 1927 and beyond. So, presumably, his whole entire life, he had contact with something from another world, and I cannot find anything on it. Again, the last name is Overby, and this is North Carolina, Mount Airy, North Carolina. So if anybody out there wants something to do, if you find anything, let me know. Good luck. But I don't know. Maybe you live there. Maybe it's a local legend to you guys. I don't know. Reach out to me, because I am very fascinated by this. I want to know more. And of course, they asked if I thought it was connected to Indrid, and I don't know if it is or isn't. It's is very unlikely. Indrid would have been born in like the 1920s, right? So probably not. Um, but who knows? Who
That,
knows?
that is fascinating. That is a really nice end point to wrap things up on. I have not heard of that before.
Yeah.
Wow.
Nobody
But
has.
yeah, a lot of times though, your local historian, your local history teacher will have some weird thing that they know about that the world does not know about.
Yeah.
So I hope that you get some follow up on that.
Yeah.
And yeah, by all means, please contact Ashley Hilt. If you want to contact me, that's cool too, and I'll pass it along to her. But I check my email like by the signs of the moon. So, it might be better to go directly to Asher's there. But yeah, that sounds fascinating.
Yeah. We'll see what comes of it. I haven't done the full family history yet there. We will. We'll see if there's descendants where they're from. Of course I'm going to contact the cemetery itself. see what they say about it, and then just continue from there. But if anybody wants to help, I'm open to it because I definitely got my hands full with a lot of things right now. But this is I need more on this one.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, that'd be fascinating to hear where that goes. Well, hey, and of course, I'd like to have you back on when it's gone somewhere and
Yeah.
you know something and you have a number of irons in the fire, to say the minimum. Is there anything you'd like to tell the listeners about before we close things up here?
Yeah, I mean, just
I
of
mean,
course,
other than
let's.
the obvious.
Yeah, right. Of course, listen to the podcast on Wednesdays. We talk weird. Leave it review if you could. That'd be wonderful. You can follow myself on social media on Facebook. I'm Ashley Hilt. I'm the one with the red hair. On Twitter or I guess it's X now, and Instagram at it's Ashers with a Z. And then of course check out Singular Fortean Society or singularfortean.com to follow my co-host Tobias Whalen and everything that he does.
All right. Well, hey, thank you very much for being guests tonight, Ashers. Folks, I've got a lot of material here. This has been a really great evening, and hopefully we hear more in the future. Um, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here with us, Ashers. Thank you and good night.